Strange medical treatments in the Middle Ages. The wind moves slowly over the stones of a medieval town. It curls around the edges of moss-covered roofs, slips beneath the wooden shutters of sleeping homes, and sighs against the chapel bell that hasn't rung in days. It is the year 1272, and though the stars shimmer in the night sky with ancient confidence, the people below live in uncertainty. The candle burns low in the healer's hut. Its flame dances against the uneven walls, casting shadows that mimic movement where there is none. Shelves sag beneath jars of dried herbs, some familiar, some with names long lost to time. A bundle of thyme tied with red twine hangs from the ceiling, spinning slowly in the draught. There is no glass in the window, only thick linen drawn across the frame, breathing in and out with the wind. Outside, the moon sits like a pale coin above the hills. Inside, a patient sleeps, and beside them, a healer waits, not in silence, but in listening, because to treat the sick in the Middle Ages was not to act. It was to attune, to observe the subtle rhythms of flesh, to hear the language of fever and the dialect of breath. It required stillness, attention, intuition wrapped in ritual, and most of all, trust in the invisible. For the medieval body was not just bone and blood, it was a vessel of symbol and spirit, a reflection of the stars, the sins of ancestors, and the unseen forces that moved between heaven and earth. Health was harmony, disease, discord, and the healer's task, not to cure as modern minds might think, but to restore the song. Sometimes this meant bloodletting. A patient would be laid on a low bench, their arm extended, and a small incision made in the median vein. A bowl would catch the blood as it flowed, carefully measured, not too much, not too little, because every drop was sacred and dangerous. Too much blood was thought to cause fever, lust, and mania. Too little, and the spirit grew cold, passive, melancholy. The healer might consult a zodiac chart before choosing the time of the cut. The moon in Virgo was ideal for head ailments, Mars rising in Scorpio, dangerous for incisions. It was science, of a kind, or rather, a belief system finely tuned to the cycles of nature, even if the explanations no longer hold under modern scrutiny. But belief is its own kind of medicine. There was another treatment used for those afflicted with what we might now call depression or anxiety. In those days, it was called melancholia, a darkness of the soul caused by an excess of black bile. The treatment, a regimen of sweet smells, gentle music, and painted walls. Rooms would be adorned with images of paradise, of saints smiling, of calm rivers and golden trees. Incense of rose and myrrh would burn in clay pots. Musicians, if they could be found, would play soft psalms or secular lullabies on the rebec or lute. And every evening the patient would be offered a tincture made from violets, honey, and rainwater collected from the church roof. No one believed these things could cure the sadness, but they believed beauty could balance it, that the soul, when surrounded by grace, might find its own way back to light. Other afflictions required sterner methods. For fevers, a common treatment involved wrapping the patient in wet sheets, then baking them gently by the hearth. The idea was to sweat the illness out, to trap it and drive it from the pores like a demon chased from a chapel. Sometimes, leeches were added to the process, not placed on skin, but boiled in water which the patient would then sip in small amounts, to take in the memory of the creature. One text reads, but not its violence. Symbolism mattered more than function. The body, after all, was not a machine. It was a story being told by the soul. A particularly feared condition was known as night air sickness, a weakness that struck those who slept too close to the ground or near swampy places. Its symptoms included chills, headaches, strange dreams, and sudden nosebleeds. Treatment: sleep elevated. Hang garlic near the head, whisper the names of 5 saints before closing the eyes, and if possible, sleep beneath a blanket embroidered with the sign of the cross in red thread, ideally sewn by a virgin. Before the harvest moon, these instructions were not questioned, they were followed, because healing required not only herbs and heat, but faith. Not only action, but precision. And then there were the remedies for broken bones. Before the invention of modern splints, healers used bark, boiled linen, and even softened beeswax to mold around fractures. The wax would be warmed by hand and carefully shaped, then cooled with prayers and lavender water. A broken arm wasn't just a limb out of place. It was a sign that balance somewhere had been broken, that a vow had been forgotten, that the household needed a cleansing. that an offering must be made to restore unseen equilibrium. In monasteries, bones were often set by monks trained in anatomy through ancient texts. They read by candlelight, copying diagrams by hand, trusting the wisdom of their long-dead sources more than their own eyes. Illness walks here not in shadows, but in plain sight. It clings to the air like wood smoke. It whispers from dry lips and hollow coughs, and it dwells behind the eyes of healers who know too well that knowledge, in this time, is a flickering flame easily blown out by wind. Fear, or ignorance, that there are no sterile rooms, no white coats, no clinical certainty, only hope, herbs, and the unseen hand of God. In a small village in northern England, nestled between the curve of a muddy river and a crumbling abbey, a woman named Isolde lights a candle before tending to her sick son. His fever has not broken in 2 days. The village healer has already visited an old woman with fingers stained from years of mixing plants and prayers. Her recommendation, a poultice made from crushed leeches, rosemary, and goat's milk, applied to the boy's chest during the 2nd hour after sunset, while chanting the psalm of deliverance backwards. Strange, yes, but Isolde does not question it, because in the Middle Ages, medicine was never just about the body. It was a dance between belief and desperation, a delicate waltz where faith held one hand, and folklore held the other. The great physicians of the time, those who studied in monasteries or traveled through war-torn cities, relied on the teachings of Galen and Hippocrates. Yet, what filtered down into village life was often something else entirely, a blend of astrology, superstition, trial, and error. For instance, if a person complained of headaches, it wasn't uncommon to blame the alignment of the planets, especially Saturn. A simple migraine could be seen as the influence of a cold, dry star pressing its weight onto the brain. The solution: apply a salve of boiled sage and pig's brain behind the ears, then bury a frog under the threshold of the patient's home, to absorb the lingering celestial imbalance. This was not considered madness, it was logic of the era, and logic, like medicine, is a reflection of time and culture. There were 4 humors believed to govern health: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Each person had a balance unique to them. If someone became ill, the treatment focused not on symptoms but on restoring the humors to harmony. Too much blood, leeching. Too much black bile, purged the stomach with wormwood and vinegar. Too little, phlegm, sniff, powdered fish scales. It sounds peculiar, now perhaps even laughable, but it was the world's best guess at healing, rooted in centuries of observation and desperate innovation. And so, homes were filled with jars of dried herbs, bowls of animal fat, and scraps of parchment with scrawled prayers. Garlic hung from rafters, not just to ward off spirits, but to draw illness from the lungs. Lavender was used to calm a troubled mind, and nettle tea, a miracle for aching joints. Then there were the more drastic measures, like trepanation, practice of drilling a hole into the skull to release evil spirits, or pressure believed to cause madness, performed without anesthetic. It relied on quick hands, and often the patient's acceptance that healing might come not through survival, but through submission to divine will. There were reports of patients surviving such procedure to life, calmer, quieter, changed. Some say it was brain trauma, others say it was the evil spirit, finally set free. There were also urine charts, complex, color-coded scrolls used by healers to diagnose patients, based solely on the hue and clarity of their urine. A golden yellow suggested balance, a murky brown, perhaps demonic possession, greenish tints, likely indigestion. Every shade held meaning. In a time without X-rays, the body spoke in fluids and odors. And then there were charms, carried in pouches around the neck, hung above beds, or stitched into the lining of clothes. These small tokens bore Latin phrases, saint names, or obscure symbols. A charm against plague, a charm against toothache, a charm to prevent miscarriage. They were not meant to replace medicine. They were medicine, because healing, in those days, was as much about belief as it was about any physical intervention. And belief was powerful. Back in the village, Ice watches her son sleep. His breathing is uneven, but steady. The poultice steams softly against his skin. Outside, the wind has quieted, and the candle at the windowsill flickers but does not die. She does not know if the goat's milk or the psalm is what helps him. She only knows she must continue, because in this age, there are no guarantees, only Rituals. Only rhythms. Only the quiet hope that somewhere between the shadow of death and the warmth of faith, a healing might be coaxed into being. And so, in the heart of the Middle Ages, under roofs that leak and skies that never fully clear, medicine walks softly, with herbs in one hand and prayer in the other. To be a monk healer was to walk the narrow bridge between the sacred and the scientific. To touch the flesh, but always remember the spirit within, and through it all, through fevers and fractures, melancholias and misalignments, there was the ever-present belief that suffering was not senseless, that pain had a purpose, not a punishment, necessarily, but a process, a pilgrimage of the body, toward clarity. And so the healer sat beside the sick, not with arrogance, but humility, not to defeat illness, but to accompany it, to speak the prayers, to boil the herbs, to bear witness, because in the Middle Ages, healing was not the act of a savior, it was the duty of a companion. Morning breaks over the monastery garden, though the sun is shy behind a pale veil of mist. The dew clings not only to the herbs and grass, but to the steps of the young apprentice who walks the stone path with careful feet. He carries a wooden bowl of warm wine steeped in yarrow and ash, the mixture trembling as he moves past a sleeping statue of Saint Raphael. Inside the infirmary, Brother Anselm waits. He is old, his hair long and white, tucked behind his ears like parchment folded for safekeeping. His fingers bear the memory of hundreds of hands held in prayer and in pain. His robe smells faintly of clove oil and beeswax, of years spent among wounds and whispers. Today, he will perform a bloodletting, not out of cruelty, not even out of certainty, but because the body, like the seasons, must be allowed to change. The patient, a young man who has suffered from persistent fevers, is laid on a straw-filled cot. His lips are dry, his forehead shines, his pulse is quick but faint, like the wing-beat of a moth lost inside a church. Brother Anselm examines the urine golden brown, cloudy, with a trace of green at its edges. He nods. The stars align. The moon is waning. The fever speaks not of possession, but of imbalance. Too much heat, too much blood. The solution is release. He recites a prayer from the Psalter as he prepares the incision, dipping the iron knife into oil mixed with frankincense and ash. The apprentice holds the patient's arm steady, whispering Ave Marias under his breath. The cut is swift. The blood, dark and thin, pools slowly in the basin below. Anselm watches it carefully, not for quantity, but for texture, for messages. A clot shaped like a bird might mean recovery. A ripple in the bowl could be a sign to stop. Every drop carries a story. When enough blood has been drawn, he binds the wound with linen soaked in rosemary and lays a charm on the boy's chest. 4 small stones arranged in the shape of a cross, bound by a strand of wool from a sheep blessed at Easter. The room is quiet again, but something has shifted. The fever will break, or it won't. But the ritual is complete, and that, for the people of this age, means the healing has begun. In the villages beyond the abbey, bloodletting is not confined to monks, barbers. To perform it, you can find them in open markets, their striped poles swirling red and white, a silent echo of veins opened and bandages bound. They use leeches, often black, slick creatures drawn from stagnant ponds and stored in jars wrapped in damp cloth. They are placed behind the ears, along the spine, near the groin, wherever the humors seem most agitated. The poor, unable to pay in coin, offer eggs, cheese, or candles in exchange. The rich commission private bleedings at home, with silk sheets turned aside and brass bowls warmed near the hearth. But no matter the location, the goal is the same: balance. And balance, in a world ruled by extremes, fire and water, light and dark. Sin and salvation is the nearest thing to peace. Some healers practice scarification, using small blades to make multiple shallow cuts along the skinny, especially on the back or legs. These are not meant to draw large amounts of blood, but to let the illness escape by whisper rather than scream. Children are often treated with this method. A child with night terrors might have his legs gently scored, then wrapped in cloth sprinkled with powdered hawthorn. It is said that the spirit that causes bad dreams will follow the path of pain back into the earth. Strange. And yet tender. Because even in the harshness of medieval life, there is room for gentleness. Room for metaphors turned to medicine. Some treatments go beyond the physical. A woman plagued by visions, perhaps epilepsy, perhaps trauma, is taken to a healer in the woods outside Rouen. This woman, known only as Lys, is both feared and respected. She speaks with birds. She knows the names of herbs in 3 languages. Her house is round, with feathers tied to the rafters. She listens to the woman's tale. Then she prescribes her no potion, no poultice but a journey. You must walk to the chapel of St. Cuthbert, Lys says, and you must walk backward the entire way. The woman blinks, and when you arrive, you must speak aloud every name you have ever been called. She does as instructed. The visions lessen. Perhaps the ritual distracted the mind. Perhaps it offered symbolic release, or perhaps healing, in its deepest sense, does not always live in the body, but in the story we are willing to tell ourselves to make sense of the pain. So, whether by blood drawn from a vein, or tears drawn from the soul. The treatments of the Middle Ages were not aimless, they were acts of meaning, and in that meaning many found relief, not because the methods were perfect, but because the intention was pure, the belief was whole. And, sometimes, belief is the most powerful remedy of all. In the corner of a cold chamber, lit by a single beam of sun piercing through stained glass, rests a wicker basket lined with straw. Inside, curled tightly, is a hedgehog. The nun who brought it here, Sister Beatrix, believes its breath can cure the lingering cough that plagues the boy lying nearby. She has been taught, like many in her convent, that certain creatures carry divine favor. The hedgehog, known for curling into a tight ball, is said to hold illnesses within its spines, if warmed properly. A living sponge for the sickness of the soul. She places the basket near the boy's head, whispers a psalm, and waits. There is no potion, no incision, only stillness. A strange treatment, yes, but Sister Beatrix believes, and belief is a salve that often soothes before it heals. In another corner of the abbey, beeswax is being melted for candles, but also for wax poultices, used to treat boils and ulcers. The wax is mixed with sheep fat, a few drops of wine, and when available, the ashes of a burnt relic, such as a saint's garment or the edge of a holy book. The holiness of the object, even in ashes, is thought to imbue the mixture with power. Beyond the physical dot, no one asks how or why, they simply receive. Elsewhere in the countryside, a different remedy is being prepared, this one from rooster droppings, dried and powdered, to be mixed with vinegar and rubbed into the scalp to cure baldness or head chills. Yes, head chills, a condition described as a coldness of the crown, believed to invite madness, forgetfulness, or heretical thoughts. It is not a treatment made in malice, but in careful logic. The rooster, a creature that greets the dawn, is considered a symbol of awakening. Therefore, his droppings hold the metaphor of clarity. In the logic of the time, metaphors become molecules, and healing becomes poetry. The use of animals in medicine was far-reaching. Mouse paste, preparation of mashed mouse, oil and nutmeg were used for ear infections. Goat lung soup, recommended for those with breathing troubles. And most curious of all, toadstone charms, fossil-like objects believed to form inside the heads of toads, were worn on necklaces to prevent poisoning. Children were often given dried toad skin in small pouches sewn into their cloaks, not to frighten, to protect, because childhood was fragile, and in a world where half of all children never saw their 5th birthday, anything that promised protection was embraced with open arms and quiet desperation. At the royal courts, treatments were no less strange. One queen, suffering from swollen joints and sleeplessness, was prescribed a bath infused with crushed rubies. Another was advised to rub ground emerald on her temples to dispel noble fatigue. Gemstone medicine was rooted in the belief that everything of the earth contained both beauty and power. The sparkle of a sapphire could soothe the eyes. The heat of a garnet could warm a cold wound. Of course, only the wealthy could afford such luxuries. The poor, in contrast, turned to bone powder scraped from skulls, or long bones of the dead, and mixed into mead or porridge. It was thought that consuming a fragment of the deceased transferred strength. This practice was often done in secret, especially during plagues, when desperation outpaced taboo. In fact, the Black Death, that monstrous wave of death that swept across Europe, brought with it an avalanche of strange cures. Some kissed the feet of lepers in repentance, others wore the bones of martyrs in belts around their waists. Many drank concoctions of crushed rose petals, vinegar, and unicorn horn, though what was sold as unicorn horn was often just narwhal tusk. Still, hope makes strange bargains, and the dying grasp at myths with the same hands they grasp at their children, their lovers, their faith, but not all. Treatments were so extravagant in small villages. Onion poultices were used to draw out illness. Whole onions were boiled, sliced, and laid across the soles of the feet to pull fever down and out. Afterward, the onions were buried in the earth. They were said to be toxic with sin. Even the act of burying them became a sacred gesture, a burial not of food, but of suffering. In convents, freckle treatments included rubbing the skin with basil and rainwater collected on the feast day of St. Agnes. In monasteries, eye salves, made of honey, wine, and mashed garlic were applied, with goose feathers, and for madness. A prayer whispered into a locked box, which was then worn around the neck of the afflicted, a physical container for chaos, a sacred amulet against storms of the mind. The deeper one travels into medieval medicine, the clearer it becomes. The line between remedy and ritual was never meant to be straight. It curved like a path through a dark wood, winding between hope and holiness, between wild guesses and ancient traditions passed from hand to trembling hand. And the people, they walked this path not because they were ignorant, but because it was the only one lit by FIRELIGHT, by candle, by grace, that perhaps, just perhaps, by something more. There is no silence like the silence of a dying village, no birdsong, number, distant hammer, no laughter, no breath, only the wind, moving through open shutters and broken doors, as if mourning the ones it once brushed past. It is 1348. The Black Death has come. It does not knock. It enters, through ships, through rats, through unseen touch. It spares no class, no saint, no secret, and in its wake, desperation deepens into invention. Across Europe, physicians vanish, cloistered or dead. The wealthy flee to the countryside. The poor bury the poor. And in the absence of explanation, medicine turns toward mystery. People believe the plague is punishment, a divine scourge, a cleansing fire from heaven. And so, to be healed, one must repent. In town squares and along roadsides, processions of flagellants begin to appear. Hooded figures, barefoot, shirtless, bleeding. They whip their own backs with iron-tipped cords, chanting hymns between sobs and gurgles. Their bodies become altars of atonement, their pain a sacrifice on behalf of a world that has offended its creator. The movement grows. Hundreds, thousands. They travel from city to city, performing rituals of public penance, kneeling in ash, kissing the earth, reciting the sins of mankind in long, trembling lists. They are not doctors, but they offer what doctors cannot, a reason. And in a time of fear, a reason is as powerful as a cure. In monasteries, the air is thick with incense, not for ceremony but as protection. It is believed that good sense repelled the miasmath, the bad air thought to carry the plague. Monks burn cloves, frankincense, juniper, and sometimes even sulfur, filling the halls with a choking sweetness that masks the stench of decay. Doctors, those who remain, begin to wear beaked masks, the nose of the mask stuffed with dried flowers and herbs. These plague doctors move through the streets like omens, clad in long waxed coats, their eyes hidden behind round glass. They carry sticks not to fight, but to examine at a distance, poking at boils and wounds without touching. And their remedies, a blend of ancient texts and urgent guesses. Boils are lanced with golden needles, then packed with crushed fig and warm wine. Some drink potions of ground, emerald or sapphire. Others inhale the smoke of burned rosemary and dried orange peel. But nothing works. Nothing. And so, the people turn back to faith. Some believe the alignment of Saturn and Jupiter caused the disease, others that it was the result of sin, gluttony, pride, lust, envy, the usual suspects. And so, entire communities gather in chapels, begging forgiveness. Priests read from Revelation. The end is near. They whisper, prepare the soul. Children are passed beneath holy icons. Women lie prostrate on the church floor for days, refusing food, believing hunger will cleanse the curse. It is not unusual for the sick to be surrounded by candles and recitations until death. The Ars Moriendi, the art of dying well, is read aloud, guiding the soul toward its final rest, because when healing fails, the only thing left is a good death. And yet, some survive. No one knows why. A man who drank nothing but onion broth, a woman who lived in a cave and rubbed garlic into her skin, a boy who wore a dried frog on a string round his neck. They survive, and in their survival, their strange rituals become medicine. Whispers travel faster than disease, and soon entire villages begin to wear frog charms. Garlic hangs above beds, onions are buried at crossroads. Bathing becomes forbidden. Wet skin, they say, opens the pores to evil. The more peculiar the cure, the more powerful it seems. In Italy, a belief spreads that rubbing crushed ruby mixed with rosewater on one's chest can prevent infection. In France, some drink aged urine, believing it counteracts the venom of the air. In England, sick rooms are filled with cockerels believed to absorb illness through their feathers. If the bird dies, the patient is said to recover. Animals become scapegoats, symbols, and as the plague continues to devour, the boundaries between science, ritual, and madness dissolve. One city seals its gates, another burns all black cats. A bishop commands his followers to fast for 40 days, barefoot, in silence. A merchant places a live eel inside his mouth each morning, swearing it keeps death at bay. These stories live. They multiply. Because in a time without hope, the strange becomes sacred, and medicine, once rooted in humors and herbs, now kneels fully before the altar of fear. Yet not all healers lose themselves. Some remain steady, like Sister Magdalena, a nun in the mountains of Austria, who tends the sick with calm and song. She believes in cleanliness, in soft words, in herbs gathered under full moons. She does not claim to cure, she only comforts. And many say those who die in her care do so gently, as if the soul is released, not torn. Her touch becomes known, her presence, a kind of grace. And in a world of agony, grace is rare medicine indeed. Night falls gently upon the village, not with silence, but with a soft collection of sounds. The bark of a distant dog, the whisper of trees, the murmur of prayers behind wooden shutters. And then, the steps. Bare feet brushing dirt. Figures cloaked in wool, faces hidden by kerchiefs or hoods, move toward the forest's edge. They carry pouches, bowls, a lantern, dimmed by soot. These are not witches, they are healers of the dark, women and men who work not in defiance of the church, but beside it at its margins, where candles flicker and rules bend. Their knowledge is old, older than the Latin words carved into cathedral walls. Their medicine comes from the soil, the moon, the seasons. Tonight, they gather for a ritual known simply as the root turning. It is believed that on certain nights, especially those when the moon is neither full nor new, certain roots gain power. Burdock, mandrake, and valerian are unearthed slowly, with whispered prayers. No iron tools, only wooden spoons or bare hands. The roots must not hear fear. They must be lulled. One healer known as Mayer wraps the roots in black cloth and places them in a jar with wine and a drop of blood her own. She will use this mixture to treat what she calls sleep fever, wasting illness that steals dreams and memory. By dawn, she will have made enough for 7 doses, no more, because nature gives only what is earned. Back in the village, another healer works under different shadows. His name is Osric, a widower. Quiet, he bathes the sick and act, now controversial, for in many parts of Europe during the late Middle Ages bathing has become suspect. Clean skin, it is believed, opens the pores too wide, makes the body vulnerable, and so water is feared. But Osric believes illness clings to filth, that the body must be soothed, not sealed. He heats water with rosemary and thyme. He chants not prayers, but songs, old lullabies from his mother's tongue. He pours the water slowly over a child's back. The child coughs, then relaxes. Sometimes. That's all healing is, permission to soften. Osric's baths are not public. He works in his cellar, by lamplight. No one thanks him openly, but his door is never empty. In other towns, bathing is replaced with dry washing, a ritual involving powders made from crushed herbs, chalk, and powdered bones. This dust is rubbed into the skin, believed to absorb sickness and neutralize sin. It is not unpleasant. Many say it tingles, like snow melting against flesh, and after, the patient is wrapped in wool, kissed on the forehead, and told to dream of light. Some healers go further still. They bury the sick temporarily in warm earth. It is called the return. A shallow pit is dug, and the ailing body is laid within, covered to the chest in soil, warmed by coals or the sun. The idea is to give the sickness back to the land. The earth, being eternal, can absorb what the human body cannot endure. Often, herbs are placed near the mouth, thyme, sage, and sometimes a sliver of garlic. The patient lies still, listens, to the heartbeat of the world. After an hour, they are lifted gently from the ground, their limbs rubbed with oil, their eyes shaded from the sun. Not everyone recovers, but many say they feel lighter, as if something left them, something heavy, invisible, and unspoken. That there is a belief among these healers that the body remembers seasons, and that illness comes when we forget our place in the cycle. Too much stillness brings stagnation, too much heat, inflammation, too much light, blindness. So they restore through opposites. Cold compresses for fever, dark rooms for headache, silence for hysteria, laughter for grief. One healer keeps a collection of feathers: raven, sparrow, owl. She chooses them based on the patient's dreams. A woman plagued by visions of drowning is brushed with owl feathers dipped in lavender. A boy afraid of wolves is comforted with raven feathers and milk. It is not scientific, but it is gentle. And gentleness, in a harsh world, is powerful. In the convent near the coast, Sister Mirabelle prepares a poultice of clay, sea salt, and linden leaf. She believes that pain in the joints comes from unspoken regrets that settle in the bones like stones in a river. She applies the mixture with prayer, and as it dries, she sings, not hymns, but lullabies, because some pains are ancient and must be sung to sleep. So the night passes, and with it, 1,000 small rituals, half medicine, half memory. The world may not understand them, but those who receive them, those feverish, shaking, lost souls who find their way to warm hands and cool herbs, do not ask for explanation, they ask only for peace. And here, in the folds of shadow, they find it. Before sunrise, before the world fully wakes, the scriptorium stirs, a long hall lit by oil lamps, shelves lined with parchment, the quiet scratching of quills over vellum. This is where healing is written, not spoken, not performed, but written, with ink made from crushed gallnuts and soot, with pens carved from goose feathers, by hands calloused from years of copying holy texts and anatomical prayers. The monasteries heal. The monk, Brother Theodoric, leans over a sheet of calfskin parchment. He's copying from an older volume. The pages are fragile. They smell of time and dust. This book has no title, only a sigil drawn on its cover, a serpent curled around a cross. Inside are recipes, not for meals, but for maladies. One page is devoted entirely to diseases of the head and melancholy of the mind. It suggests a bath of boiled lettuce leaves, rosewater, and the marrow of a young goat, followed by recitations of Psalm 88 in reverse order. Next to this recipe, in smaller script, a note, effective only if administered on the third day after a thunderstorm. Another entry lists a salve made of eel oil, birch bark, and powdered emerald, meant to be rubbed on the chest of those suffering from breathless grief. There is no science here in the modern sense, but there is a pattern, a language, a belief that everything has its season, its moment, its key. Books like this are hidden, copied slowly, guarded fiercely. Sometimes entire monasteries are burned during wars, but the healing books are smuggled out, sewn into sacks of grain, buried beneath candle altars, memorized line by line by apprentices who are told, "Forget everything else, remember this." Why? Because medicine, in this age, is sacred knowledge, knowledge that walks between danger and devotion. In the convent of St. Clara, Sister Evodia writes her own texts. She has treated hundreds of women, noble and poor, young and old. Her book is written in a secret cipher, known only to the sisters. Inside, pages on birthing pains, on milk flow, on herbs for sorrow. She describes how chamomile and crushed pearl help a woman who weeps without cause, how mint and black wine bring heat back to a cold womb, and how wrapping a newborn in the skin of a hare ensures peaceful sleep. She does not question these things. She records them because they work, and because every woman she has helped told her something the world would not hear. So she listens, and she writes, and the book grows. Elsewhere, in the north, a noble family keeps a book of cures in their private chapel. It contains remedies passed from grandmother to granddaughter, often written in the margins of psalters. Some pages are stained with blood, wine, or oil. A treatment for toothache reads, place a raven's feather between the cheek and gum. Spit 3 times, do not speak for a full hour. Then say the name of the person you love most. The pain will leave you and enter the silence. It is not rational, but it acknowledges pain in a way that modernity sometimes forgets, not just as physical discomfort, but as a language, a signal, a story. Other books speak of curing curses, of removing the evil eye with sprigs of rue boiled under the new moon, of smearing lamb's blood above the door to keep away spirits that cause fever, of binding a scroll of scripture around the ankle of a restless child. Some entries are single lines: burn sage and fennel before morning, sleep with a poppy beneath your tongue when haunted by dreams, do not eat honey during an eclipse. In these pages, the cosmos and the body are one. What happens in the sky shapes the blood. What moves in the earth stirs the marrow. What whispers in sleep can rot the liver, or heal the heart. That is why treatises are copied slowly, because they are not simply books. They are maps of the invisible. And in an age where so much of illness is mystery, these maps are as precious as relics. Many of these books are eventually lost, burned in wars, buried with their authors, dismissed as superstition by rising tides of science. But a few survive, tucked into museum vaults, preserved in glass cases, and when opened today, the scent of lavender, ink, and history escapes like breath. Held for centuries. Under words, they do not shout, they whisper. Still, the wind shifts slightly, carrying the faint sound of bells, not church bells, not calls to prayer, but healing bells, thin, high, shimmering notes that tremble through the cold air and disappear like mist. They are not rung to gather, they are rung to protect. In many villages, during outbreaks of illness or misfortune, iron bells are hung near doorways, rooftops, or trees. It is believed the sound vibrates through unseen spaces, disrupting evil spirits, scattering disease, or simply reminding the air that the people are not surrendering. These bells are small, often handmade, sometimes blessed by a monk, sometimes not, but always they are placed with hope. Hope that illness can be unsettled, hope that suffering might be soothed in the same spirit. Music becomes medicine, not entertainment, not performance, but invocation. Monasteries and convents are built with acoustics in mind. The vaulted ceilings and stone corridors carry chants not just to ears, but into bones. Gregorian chants, slow and repetitive, are sung not to fill the space, but to alter it. Brother Lorian, a Benedictine monk, believes certain tones realign the body's humors. He sings while applying poultices. He sings while crushing herbs. He sings at the bedsides of the dying, not to delay death, but to ease the soul's travel. Because sometimes, the sound is not for the body, it is for what lies beyond it. In hospitals, known as houses of God, songs are prescribed. The sick are not asked to sing, only to listen, and the chants are chosen carefully based on ailment, temperament, and phase of the moon. A woman with sorrowful heart may hear Dies Irae softened with a lute. A man with trembling hands might be surrounded by the melody of Salve Regina, sung by 3 novices in harmony. The tones are measured, never loud, never fast, because healing, like prayer, requires space. It is said that in some places, music is used in surgery. When a limb must be removed, a drum is played to distract the ear. When a wound is cauterized, a slow chant follows the burn to replace the scream. This is not to romanticize the agony, but to remind the body that it is seen, that pain is not suffered alone. And then there is silence, rare, holy, deliberate. Healers often prescribe time in quiet gardens, enclosed spaces planted with lavender, mint, and rosemary. The sick are led there at dawn, wrapped in wool, and seated beneath ivy-draped arches. They are not spoken to, they are not touched, they are left to listen to the silence. Birdsong leaves rustling, their own heartbeats slowing. It is in these moments that some say the fever breaks, the mind returns, the crying stops, because sometimes it is not the noise of healing that helps, but the absence of everything else. One order of nuns practices the vow of quiet touch. They treat the sick without words, without sound, only warm water, cloth, breath, no instruction, no prayer allowed. The patient is seen, the patient is held, and in this soft restraint, many report visions of light, of ancestors, of water, not hallucinations. Reconnectation. If illness had pulled them into a narrow tunnel, and silence widened it again into a field. Elsewhere, in coastal villages, wind chimes are made from bones and seashells. They are hung near windows, believed to harmonize the energy of the house. A doctor in Normandy prescribes daily recitation of bird calls. He believes mimicking nature resets the soul's rhythm. A child with nightmares is taught to hum while sleeping. The mother places her hand on his chest, matching his vibration. No potion, no herb, just sound. Sound, and the deep human desire to tune what has gone out of tune. Because in a world without anesthesia, without MRI scans or sterile tools, healing had to come from what was available: voice, vibration, and intention. And perhaps that's why so many of these strange treatments, though forgotten, still stir something in us. Because long before we had names for serotonin or cortisol, we had song. And song knew where the wound was, even when we didn't. It begins with the moon. Always its pull, its shadow, its rhythm, watched by shepherds, by kings, by mothers of sick children lying still in straw beds. In the Middle Ages, the body was not an isolated vessel. It was a mirror, and the sky, its reflection. Each organ, each vein, each temperament was believed to be governed by celestial forces. The heart, ruled by the sun; the brain, by the moon; the liver, by Jupiter; the spleen, by Saturn; the lungs, by Mercury; the kidneys, by Venus; and the gallbladder, by Mars. To treat a malady was to consider not only the body's condition, but the position of the heavens. And so, healers became astrologers, or rather, astrologers became indispensable to healing. Charts were drawn for each patient: birth charts, planetary alignments, the moon's phase. At the moment of illness, a healer might delay bleeding a patient because Mars was too dominant, or avoid administering a tonic while the moon waxed toward fullness. Because timing mattered. It mattered more than the medicine itself. In one case, a physician named Hildegard refused to treat a feverish knight for 3 days, citing Saturn's mischief and a retrograde Mercury. The knight survived. And Hildegard's fame grew not for what he did, but for when he chose not to act. Almanacs became standard tools in apothecaries and infirmaries. They showed moon phases, planetary hours, solar eclipses, and days of omen. The most feared days when the moon was void of course, when, according to belief, the celestial forces were confused. No cure could take root then, but the most sacred, the night of the healing stars. Once every 7 years, during a specific conjunction of Venus and Mercury, it was believed that certain herbs gathered beneath starlight would carry divine potency. Healers would walk alone into fields, guided by silence and the arc of constellations. They would not speak. They would not cut. They would ask the plant for permission. Some say those herbs glowed faintly, some say they sang, and some say that when brewed into tea, they brought sleep deeper than grief and dreams, that spoken languages the living had forgotten. There were cures only stars could approve. A wart removed during a waning moon might not return. A child born under Venus was thought immune to certain fevers. A wound washed with water collected under Jupiter's light was said to close without scar. But there were warnings to never bleed a man under Mars, never operate during an eclipse, never whisper the name of a star while gazing directly at it lest it remember you. In cathedrals, the walls whispered of saints, but in private homes, the sky was scripture. One healer, a woman named Bruna, kept a book of lunar incantations. She claimed to cure sleepwalking by hanging silver bells over the doorway and burning time during moonset. Another, Father Edrich, insisted that melancholy arose when Saturn lingered too long over the house of Scorpio. To some, this was superstition. To others, wisdom beyond logic. Because the body, after all, is rhythm, heartbeat, breath, menstrual cycle, sleep cycle. And what else is the cosmos but a greater rhythm, pulsing, turning, ebbing, and flowing beyond our grasp? In one village, when a mysterious illness spread causing paralysis of the tongue and tremors in the limbs, the healer refused herbs. Instead, she mapped the stars for each afflicted person. She found they all shared the same lunar house. She buried their shoes beneath a hawthorn tree during a lunar eclipse days later. The symptoms vanished. Coincidence? Maybe, or maybe the stars had been offended and then appeased. Even the church, wary of astrology, could not fully dismiss it. Too many cures, too many patterns, too many recoveries that came not from medicine, but from timing. And so, while sermons warned against looking too long at the heavens, monasteries continued to record lunar movements beside patient records, because healing wasn't just what you gave, it was when. And sometimes it was where the sky was looking when you whispered the prayer. They arrived with dust on their boots, with cloaks heavy from long roads, with accents strange, recipes older than kings, and a patience learned from listening more than speaking. These were the border healers, not bound to one kingdom, one church, one tongue. They carried salves made from spices no local farmer could name. They spoke of diseases using words that bent the mouth differently, but what they brought was relief. In a time when borders meant fear, they offered fusion in the southern villages. A Moorish healer named Jabir arrived after the spring thaw. He set up camp near a river, not too far from the monastery, but far enough that judgment could stay silent. He brought with elemi resin from Egypt, frankincense from Arabia, and knowledge passed down from Galen, Avicenna, and names the local priests dared not mention. He treated wounds with honey and vinegar, prescribed lentils for the liver, and taught midwives how to slow bleeding with pressure points known only to desert tribes. They called him heretic, but they also called him again when their children wept in fever. In the north, a Jewish healer named Ruth carried books tied in red cloth, recipes from Iberia, notes written in Hebrew, Latin, and Arabic. She treated skin diseases with sulfur and salt, burned rue leaves to ward off bad air, and whispered blessings in languages. The wind seemed to recognize she was not welcome, and yet she stayed, because illness does not care for politics, and healing crosses borders long before armies do. In the ports of the Mediterranean, sailors brought not only spices and silk, but poultices, dried herbs, and cures whispered in coastal taverns: a tincture of turmeric for swelling, clove oil for toothaches, cinnamon bark brewed in goat's milk to soothe a grieving heart. These recipes traveled faster than law, and in villages too small for cathedrals, they were kept in oral memory, passed from grandmother to granddaughter, stable boy to midwife, innkeeper to beggar. Sometimes the knowledge arrived with refugees, after fires, after war, after plague. Survivors carried no gold, only stories of healing, like the one of a man from the East who taught a French healer how to place hot coals in a bowl of rosemary beneath a sickbed to chase nightmares, or the woman from Byzantium who rubbed crushed pearls on the wrists of the dying not to cure, but to remind the soul that it once knew light. Blending became survival, and in that blend the world softened. Of course, not all welcomed this. The church issued edicts, some kings banned foreign herbs, and healers were sometimes tried for witchcraft, simply for knowing too much. But knowledge, like wind, does not obey walls, and so it slipped through cracks, whispered behind doors, folded into bread dough, hidden beneath veils, and inscribed on the back of rosaries. It lived, even when its carriers did not. One traveling healer, a Romani woman called Leora, never stayed in one village more than a fortnight. She spoke 7 tongues, knew the pulse of weather before it changed, and claimed to have cured a count's madness with a tincture of poppy, blue hyssop, and 1 drop of her own tears. She wore bells on her ankles not for show, but so the sick would hear her coming. Children said she walked without touching the ground. Adults said she knew too much, but no one said she failed, because when she touched a forehead and sang, the fever listened. The wandering healers are mostly gone now, faded into legend, but in the margins of old books, you might still find their names, in half-faded ink, spelled differently in every language, but always followed by the same phrase: she healed me when no one else would. It did not come with warning, only silence, then cough, then fever, then blackened skin, swollen glands, and a stillness in the chest that felt like drowning without water. The Black Death, as it would one day be named, arrived like fog, not just in one village or kingdom, but everywhere, from the ports of Messina to the hills of France, from English manors to German monasteries. It came, and with it, the most strange and tragic chapter of medieval healing. First came the herbs, not ingested, but burned. Streets were filled with the scent of rosemary, thyme, sage, and wormwood, smoldering in braziers or tossed into bonfires lit at every corner. People believed the air itself was sick, that illness rode the wind like a spirit, so they smoked it out. If a child fell ill, dried lavender was tied around their neck. If a man coughed, clove-studded oranges were pressed to his mouth. Windows were sealed, garlic hung from doors, camphor rubbed into skin until it burned. When that failed, they turned to purification. Bloodletting resumed, more aggressive than ever. Some healers recommended cutting behind the knees or under the tongue. Others demanded leeches be applied, while reciting prayers backward. To confuse the devil, holy water was poured into wine and drunk in silence. Saints' bones were carried from town to town like relics of immunity, and if the local healer died, which many did, people turned to whomever remained: the blacksmith, the midwife, the widow with the sharp eyes. Next came the hordes of men and women marching barefoot, shirtless, through cities, whipping themselves in rhythmic unity, blood on their backs, songs on their tongues. They believed the plague was punishment, and so they punished themselves before God could do worse. It didn't stop the death, but it gave suffering a rhythm. Some wore amulets made from crushed emerald and wax, shaped into small skulls or crosses. Others carried plague letters, pieces of parchment etched with sacred symbols, folded and hidden in shoes or sewn into cloaks. A boy in Bohemia carried a piece of a saint's robe under his tongue for 3 days. When he survived, it became legend, the most haunting figure of this time. The plague doctor, clad in long black robes coated with wax, leather gloves, wide-brimmed hat, and the beaked mask, long curved, bird-like. Inside the beak, dried flowers, herbs, vinegar-soaked rags. It was meant to filter the miasma, the corrupted air believed to spread the plague. But to those who saw him approach, he was death itself made visible. Some children ran, some bowed, some died before he reached the door. Yet within the strangeness, there was still intention. The beak was designed for survival. The herbs were chosen with care. The eyes behind the mask often terrified themselves, searched for any pattern, any sign of recovery, any trace of hope. In some towns, large crosses were painted in red over the doors of the sick. Others used straw wreaths, hung upside down, to warn strangers, and in certain places, if an entire household perished, the door was nailed shut from the outside, with a single line carved above it: God have mercy. Quarantines began at first, 20 days, then 40. From the Italian word quaranta, 40. Ships were held offshore for that period. Sailors died in their hammocks, cargo spoiled, but the disease, they hoped, would die with them before stepping onto the docks. Healing, in those times, was not always about saving. It was about delaying, separating, distancing, containing. What could not be understood. In one desperate village, mothers placed pennies in the mouths of their sick children, believing it would buy mercy from whatever spirit had taken hold. In another, lovers held hands as they were buried together in shallow graves, a vial of rose oil placed between them, as their only medicine. And still, others told stories of survivors. The woman who drank only rainwater and slept beside a yew tree. The boy who never left the bell tower and lived off rats and hope. The old healer who claimed to have seen death itself and bartered with it, offering a year of blindness in exchange for the lives of 3 children. Was it true? Who can say? But in times like that, a story is medicine too, because healing does not always look like recovery. Sometimes it looks like grace amid horror, a hand held, a prayer whispered, a flower burned in silence. They called it the wandering womb. They believed it floated inside the body, that it could move up to the throat, down to the knees, causing madness, choking, or even death. It wasn't metaphor, it was medicine. The womb was not just a part of the body in medieval thought, it was its own creature, hungry, restless, holy, dangerous. And so, women's healing became a field of quiet power and strange remedies, kept mostly in the hands of other women, midwives, mothers, witches, saints. First, there were the charms. To prevent a womb from wandering, a cloth soaked in camphor and mint was tied around the waist. To bring on a late menstruation, pennyroyal tea was brewed cautiously, in low light, often accompanied by prayers to the Virgin. To encourage conception, women bathed in rosewater under moonlight, placing fresh basil under their tongues, while lying on the earth. And when conception came, another journey began. Pregnancy was sacred and dangerous. The unborn child was thought to be vulnerable to spirits, bad air, evil eyes, and ill dreams. To protect the womb, women wore belly pendants made of coral, bone, or iron. Some carried tiny wax dolls, wrapped in red thread, as symbols of safe labor. Cravings were honored, not just for comfort, but as signs from the body. If a pregnant woman desired pears, it was said the child would be wise. If she longed for vinegar, the child would be sharp-tongued. As birth approached, the women gathered. No men, no priests, Only the midwife, the helper, and the bearer of light, often a girl tasked with holding candles steady through the night. The birthing room was ritual, lavender boiled in water, salt scattered in corners, the image of Saint Margaret, patron of childbirth, pinned above the bed. If labor stalled, the mother's hair was unbraided to release tension. If pain grew unbearable, she was told to grip an iron key or kiss the hem of a holy relic. And if blood flowed too freely, the midwife whispered to the womb itself, commanding it to close. In moments of death, for it came often, the midwife would cut a piece of cloth from the mother's gown and bury it with the baby. Two souls reunited, two stories woven together beneath the earth. Menstrual blood, too, was feared and revered. It was said to wilt flowers, dull mirrors, and spoil wine. And yet, it was used in secret cures. Some believed that a drop of menstrual blood, mixed with nettle and honey, cured fevers. Others whispered that it could break spells, if applied to the skin beneath moonlight. These were not just superstitions, they were inheritances, passed from woman to woman, guarded in kitchens, behind looms, in gardens, thick with mugwort and marjoram. There were also herbs of resistance, tansy, rue, blue cohosh, given carefully, often in whispers, to women who could not bear another child, or who had no husband, and yet a swelling belly. These remedies carried risk, of bleeding, of exile, of flames, but they also carried choice, and in that power, the Church tried to control this realm, declared certain herbs demonic, labeled some midwives as witches, insisted that pain in childbirth was Eve's punishment, not to be softened. But the women continued, in cellars, in fields, in silence they brewed, boiled, pressed, and prayed, because the womb, feared as it was, remained the first house of every king, bishop, and judge, and the women who tended to it. They were not just healers, they were guardians of the beginning. They did not call it depression, they called it melancholia, a heaviness of spirit, a drowning of joy, a fog that clouded thought and dimmed the eye's sparkle. And in the Middle Ages, it was as feared as the plague, because it made the living seem dead. Some believed it came from the imbalance of black bile, one of the four humors. Others believed it came from demons who whispered only at night, and some thought it was the soul, forgetting how to stay anchored in the body. Treating it was delicate. No blade could cut sadness, no poultice could draw out despair, so healers turned to other things. First, music. Monasteries kept choirs, not just for God, but for patients. Gregorian chants were sung at dusk, their soft rhythm believed to calm agitated minds. Simple melodies were repeated slowly, each note a step away from darkness. Some believed that certain tones could realign the humors, especially those sung in open fifths. There was a song known as lumen cordis, the light of the heart, said to bring back speech to those who had gone silent from grief. Next came the smells. Sachets of lavender and lemon balm were sewn into pillows. Burning sage was used not only to clear rooms, but to lighten thoughts. Depressed souls were sometimes placed in sunlit rooms with stained glass windows, so that color might stir the dull heart. One healer, Father Tiber, placed a patient in a blue-painted room for a week, fed him only clear broth and honey water, and instructed the monks to speak to him in verse. By the seventh day, the man wept. It was considered a success. Tears were seen as a sign that the soul was moving again. But some treatments were more severe. Those thought to be possessed were subjected to exorcism. Holy water flung on bare skin. Candles lit in the four corners of the room. Prayers shouted while the afflicted screamed or trembled. If the symptoms stopped, the Church declared victory. If not, blame was placed on sin, not sickness. Others believed madness came from evil air, so patients were made to walk barefoot through meadows at dawn to absorb dew, or sit beneath willow trees with cold stones pressed to their temples, for persistent sadness. Some healers prescribed laughter. Actors were invited to perform ridiculous plays. Clowns danced in the courtyards of hospitals. Stories with absurd endings were told in hushed tones by firelight. If a patient laughed, even once, it was believed the devil had lost his grip. There was a tale of a woman named Isabetta, who had not spoken in 2 years. A jester laid on her lap, pretending to die dramatically from a sniff of onion. She laughed so hard she coughed up her silence, and then she sang. Sometimes the remedy was touch, not medical, but human. A hand on the shoulder, a comb through tangled hair. The presence of someone willing to listen to nonsense without correcting it. One nun wrote that she cured a weeping girl by letting her braid her hair every morning while speaking only of flowers. No diagnosis, no sermon, just flowers. But many were not so lucky. The mentally ill were feared, locked in towers, banished to forest huts. Some wore iron collars to mark them as touched by moonlight. A few were believed to be visionaries, especially women. If their madness came with poetry, or dreams, or divine speech, they were sometimes made saints. If it came with screams, they were chained. There was no middle ground. That in small corners of the world, kindness persisted. A boy who painted with berries and was called mad, but whose pictures were kept by his village long after his death. An old man who muttered riddles in the town square and was fed every morning by the same baker, without fail. Not all healing in the Middle Ages came in the form of herbs or potions. Some came through emptiness. Through the deliberate act of withholding food, touch, speech, even warmth, in the belief that suffering refined the soul and sickness could be sweated out, starved out, prayed out, and so began the rituals of purification. The most common, and perhaps the oldest, was fasting in monasteries. Fasting was a weekly rhythm, not only for devotion, but for health. A monk suffering from coughs might be fed only warm water, with time for 3 days. A woman grieving the death of a child would take a silent fast, during which she ate nothing and spoke nothing, believing the absence of words would give her spirit space to grieve. During Lent, those in pain often increased their some ate only bitter greens, believing that bitterness in the mouth could draw out sorrow from the heart. There was a story of a man who fasted for 40 days, eating only snow, in hopes of curing the fire in his bones, which we now might call fever or rheumatism. He claimed the pain left on the 39th day. He died on the 40-1st. His story became a lesson, not a warning. Then there were the baths, not of luxury, but of ritual. In some towns there were wells said to be blessed by saints. Pilgrims traveled miles to bathe in waters said to cure skin diseases, infertility, melancholy, and even possession. Before entering, pilgrims fasted, confessed, and sometimes walked the last mile barefoot. The waters were cold, always cold. The chill was part of the medicine. Some healers believed the shock of the cold water recalled the soul to the body. Others believed it washed away, not disease, but guilt. One woman, accused of adultery, submerged herself in St. Agnes Spring. For 7 mornings, when she emerged, her skin bore strange marks, purple like bruises, shaped like leaves. The villagers said the water had judged her innocent. She never married again in wealthier cities. Public bathhouses doubled as healing centers. Steamed herbs filled the rooms, chamomile, yarrow, marjoram. The sick sat in silence, sweat beading on foreheads, as attendants whispered prayers and poured hot water over their backs. The goal was not only to cleanse the body, but to soften it, make it more porous to the divine. But some took it further. There were those who believed pain was the ultimate purifier. They walked on knees until they bled. They lay on beds of thorns. They wore hair shirts infested with lice. They whipped themselves at dusk, each lash a plea for forgiveness, a bargain for health. If they healed afterward, it was proof that God had listened. If they didn't, it meant they had more to purge. And then there was silence, a medicine most did not recognize as such. Monasteries had quiet cloisters where the ill were placed, not for isolation, but for repair. No one spoke to them for days. Only birdsong and wind were allowed. Meals were left at the door. Scripture was read softly nearby. And sometimes, after weeks of nothingness, a soul would return to itself. One old healer, blind from age, taught that the body healed best when it no longer had to explain itself. Even confessions were sometimes considered medicine. To speak aloud the secret, the affair, the jealousy, the curse, spoken in anger, was to unburden the body. The penance given a fast, a pilgrimage, a vow, was not punishment. It was prescription, a cleansing of what could not be seen on the skin. Some believed the earth itself could heal. They buried the sick up to their waists in mud, by sacred trees, covered chests with ash, let hands rest in flowing streams until tremors stopped, and always they prayed, not for healing, but for peace, because in the end, what most longed for was not to feel better, but to feel clean. Inside and out. When we think of medicine, we think of certainty, of science, of dosages, of charts. But in the Middle Ages, Medicine was not only a matter of knowledge, it was a matter of faith, rhythm, instinct, and story, and so many of the strangest treatments, those we now laugh at or shudder to imagine, were rooted in something deeply, quietly human, the desire to help, to ease, to do something, anything, in the face of mystery. A garlic clove worn on the ankle to ward off spirits, a song hummed over a fevered brow, a dream interpreted by moonlight and passed to the healer like a secret offering. Was it foolish, perhaps? But it was never lazy, because medicine then was not divided into doctors and patients. It was a shared experience. A mother boiled herbs for a neighbor's cough. A monk wrote out prayers for a stranger. A shepherd found mushrooms that stopped a bleeding wound, and never told anyone his name. It was not always effective, but it was always offered. And that, too, is a form of medicine. There's something profound in the way they treated not just symptoms, but stories. A man's melancholy was not merely an illness, it was a tale of grief, of lost love, of dreams turned sour. And so the remedy was poetry, music, stillness. A woman's womb was not just anatomy, it was a mystery, a force, a vessel. So the treatment was flowers, prayers, red thread, and moonlight. Today, we look back and see error, but we might also see care, the belief that the soul matters, that the mind must be soothed as well as the body, that silence is healing,